it's clear that both Abaye and Rava, because in their Taina, they made it clear that they held Tuma Hutra B'Tzibur. Okay, so now we're going back to the sugya of Bia B'Mikra Shema Bia. And we seem to be saying that Bia B'Mikra Ishma Bia, and that's why there's a problem for the Mitzvah to stick his thumb in when he's at full yoim. And by the same token, we have to say that the Torah says you're supposed to stick your brain in, so too it's matter full yoim. So Zok Gemara Lema Messiah Lay. Let's see if we could bring a raya. Do you have any extra ones? This is a menachos. Are any of those long? We have a screen. It's called Lema Messiah. Kol hasmichos shahayu sham. All of the smichas that were done in the base of Mikdash. Kair alein ani taketh l'smicha shchita. We have to make the shchita right after the smicha. And we had this sugya already right at the beginning of the Gemara, where the Gemara quotes the following two psukim. First, it says v'samach. It's right at the beginning of the parak. Pasuk reads down. It says v'samach yadai al roisha oila v'nir tzaloi l'chaper lo. And without any delay, without any change, without any movement, right away it says v'shachat es ben abakar lifnei Hashem. And if you remember this lifnei Hashem, the Gemara applied equally to the shchita as well as to the smicha. It doesn't say lifnei Hashem by the smicha, but since the pasuk goes straight from the smicha to the shchita, we say takef the smicha shchita, and there cannot not be a delay. So wherever the shchita is, which is lifnei Hashem, who did the smicha will have to be there as well. So let's see what the Gemara says. Lema Messiah kol smicha shahayu sham kair alein ani takef the smicha shchita chutz mizu, except for the shchita of the asham shal mitzayra, which is what they spritz on his behind us. Shahaisa b'shar nikner. It wasn't shar nikner. She'ein mitzayra yachal likanis l'sham. A mitzayra is not allowed to walk into the azara. At shemazon alav midam chatasoi umidam hasham. Until they bring him his kapara, and the dam of the chatos is spritzed on his behalf on the mizbeach, and the dam of osham is spritzed on his behalf on the mizbeach. Until then, he cannot come into the azara. Yet the Amrit Bia B'Mitzvahs Lo Shma Bia, if you hold Bia B'Mitzvahs Lo Shma Bia, and there's no issue with him sticking his thumb into the Azara, Lyle Yadev Elismach. So every smicha you should be able to do the same way. Stick your hand in and do the smicha. So Oibazoi, you should be able to have take up the smicha shchita. Bring the animal right to the Shar Niknar, which is where the Matorah is standing. He just leans over the line and makes his smicha. And then you can shecht right there, as Rashi points out, because Shar Niknar was centered north-south in the Azara, and it was 5 amas wide. It was 10 amas wide. So you have 5 amas, which is like 8-10 feet of space in the Shar Niknar that opens right up to the tzafin side of the Azara. Now this only works according to the sheet of Rebbe, who holds that the Tzvayna Shal Mizbeach includes all of the Azara from the east to the west, from the wall, from the eastern wall of the Azara, up until the up until the eastern wall of the Heichal, the full area. If you remember, we had a sheet who held that Al Yerech Mizbeach Tzvayna means literally the part that's due north of the Mizbeach. That's very far away from Shar Niknar. But we're going to assume that all of the northern half of the Azara is called Tzafayna, and therefore, what's the problem with doing the smicha right after the shchita? He can do the smicha and the shchita right there at Shar Niknar. Rabbi Yosef Amani, Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda, Yomar Merchach Tzafain. Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda said that you can't check anywhere on the tzafin like Rabbi said. He said it has to be only the area that's due north of the Mizbeach. That's at least 22 amas away from Shar Niknar, because there's 11 amas of Ezra's Yisrael, and then there's 11 amas of Ezra's Kahanim. So therefore, it would be impossible to be able to do the smicha and the Shechita right at Shar Nichner, and that's why there had to be a delay between the Smicha and the Shechita. For the Gemara, V'leav and Pishpish. So why didn't they make a small opening where the Mitzvah can stick his arm through the wall, right at the north side of the Mizbeach on the walls, on the northern wall of the Mizbeach, right there in that zone, which would be due north of the Mizbeach, make a hole in the wall where a Mitzvah would be able to stick his hands through, not come into the Azar, but stick his hands through and make smicha. Elamai, again, you have a raya that bia b'miktzah shma bia. Zaktamar no raya. Abaya v'rav v'damer tevayu. Hakoil b'ksav miyad Hashem Allah hiskil. David HaMelech said that I didn't ask for any amendments to the drawings of the Beis HaMikdash. The drawings, the architectural plans were given to me from the Rebbeinu Shalom, and that's how the Mizbech, that's how the Beis HaMikdash will be built, with not the slightest modification, without the slightest revision. Kol Melechas Hatavnis. Everything was done exactly as per the plans, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu didn't call for that pishpish, for that little opening. Obviously, that's how the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted the Beis HaMikdash to be built. Obviously, he wanted the Mitzvah to stand by Shar Nichner, because there is no pishpish designed into the northern wall other than the Azara, and therefore we see that there must have been a hefsek between the smicha and the shechita. Ikadamri Amar Yosef Kol Asoymech Roishay V'Ruboy Machnas. For smicha, just putting your hand in would not have been enough. He'd have to put in Roishay V'Ruboy. That already is no longer called Bia B'Mikdash. That's a real Bia into the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore we could not have taken a smicha shechita because it would be impossible to find a way for the mitzvah to be in the Azara. My timer, because you have to lean your full weight onto the animal. You can't do that by just sticking your hand through a window. It would be impossible for him to do it. So therefore, you cannot say take a smicha shechita because the smicha would have to be done out of the Azara.
By Bayis Sheni, it seems like Hortus took a lot of liberties when he built Bayis Sheni, and it looked, I can't say nothing like Bayis Rishon, but it was much larger and yeah. So and nobody seemed to be bothered by it.
Maybe that Xeris Akosov was only on the Bayis Rishon.
Maybe.
Also, I don't know which Pesach Hortus asked.
Yeah, but you don't see a controversy about it.
Yeah, so could be there's no tzivui that you're not allowed to make the Beis HaMikdash that way. David HaMelech, he made the Beis HaMikdash exactly the way it was prescribed to him.
Well, he didn't really make it. Shlomo made it, but I guess he got the information. Yeah.
It's Galos bone.
What's that?
It had this Galos bone. He let it be built.
Yeah, Galos.
Yeah.
Okay.
Someone told me that when he got married, his shver, I guess in the olden days things were different. So when he came to meet his wife, his shver picked him up from LaGuardia, and his shver is driving him through Queens towards Brooklyn, and he's pointing to all these buildings. Is that their building? Ich hab es Galos bone. Ich hab es Galos bone. So this guy thought that this girl was a billionaire. And then afterwards, when he realized he says, "You told me this is Galas bone." So yeah, ich nicht protested gunish. But then was gebon, ich hab es Galas. Sagt die Gemara weiter. Maika Savar. So what does the Gemara hold to bring this right? Ika Savar, Semichas Asham Mitzvah Daraisa. If you hold that there's a Chiv Daraisa to do the smicha of the carbon asham, and you also hold the takeoff l'smicha shchita, and it's daraisa that the shchita must be done immediately following the smicha, well, then clearly the Torah is telling you that there's an exception to the prohibition of a tame entering the Azara, because the Torah wants you to do this. So oibazoi daraisa leil v'lismoich. I'm sorry, the takeoff l'smicha shchita is daraisa, then li'ayel v'lismoich lahedya. So bring the mitzvah, the tummy, into the Azar Lahedra, because clearly this is a tzivui of the Torah. The Rachmana Amar. Rav Ada bar Masna, you know why? Even though Midairaisa, the Torah says that the Mitzvah should come into the Azara b'Tumosai and do smicha, it's a Gzera Shema Yarba b'Psis. When the Torah would be matir, the minimum entry into the Azara to do the smicha. What if he takes an extra step? He'll be chayiv kares. It's so dangerous because there's a fine line between what the Torah mandates and what's usher. The Chachamim said don't do it. Ikadamri, which is a little bit shverlich to understand. Ikadamri, or there's another approach to this kasha. Amr of Ada bar Masna, maybe smichas osha mitzvah is deraisa. So there is a chiv deraisa for the mitzvah to do the smicha, but maybe takef l'smicha shchita lav deraisa. So we have this limud from v'samach to v'shachat that there's no hefsek in between them, but maybe that's a derabanan and that's just an esmachta. But maybe midaraisa you don't have. So therefore, by the Hasham Mitzvah, we don't do takef l'smicha shchita because of the complication with the Torah. It says v'samach v'shachat. We learned this right at the beginning of our sugya. Ma smicha b'tahirin, just like the smicha may only be done by someone who's tahor. Av shchita b'tahirin. So to the shchita has to be done b'tahirin. That's clearly a limit with deraisa. The amrit lav deraisa. If you're going to say that this hekesh is not deraisa, bitmein nami mishkachesla, you'll be able to make the smicha bitmein because you don't need to take up this smicha shchita. You could make the smicha outside of the azara. Before the shchita, you're allowed to make the smicha outside of the azara, so you wouldn't have any raya. So you're forced to say ela epuch smichas osha mitzvah is lav deraisa, and the take of smicha l'smicha shchita is deraisa. Take of l'smicha shchita is undeniable because otherwise we lose the limudim of the brisa that proves that smicha could be b'tayrin. Because the whole raya was bibalti shchita has to be b'tayrin, and it's toicha azara. And the smicha has to be done right away. You cannot move the animal from outside the azara to inside the azara between the smicha and the shchita. That wouldn't be takeoff. So you have a chloraraya b'deraisa. You need takeoff the smicha shchita. So aybazoi, how could we suspend that by the Hasham Mitzvah? The teretz is because the whole smicha by the Hasham Mitzvah is only midirabanan, not midaraisa, and therefore, since you don't need smicha at all, the smicha that they mandated could be chutz lazara. And there won't be takeoff l'smicha shchita by the asham of the mitzayah because you don't need the smicha at all. Zog to Gemara Vayta. Ravina Amar la'olam le'inyan malchus hitmar. So Ravina is going back to Ula. This is gewaltig. We go back to Ula. Ula told us halacha. Amar Ula Mar Shlakish tamei shehichnis yodai lefnim loike. A tamei who sticks his hand into the Beis Hamikdash, into the Azara, he's loika shenemar. We learned a pasuk by Tazria. It tells Yoledes b'chal kodesh loy siga v'el hamikdash loy savai makish bil negia ma negia b'mikdash shma negia. Just like when you touch something, your whole body doesn't encompass that thing you touch. Your finger touches it, and that's also b'chal kodesh loy siga. Af bia b'mikdash. So too when it says v'el hamikdash loy avoi means even a little tip of your finger may not enter the Beis Hamikdash. Af bia b'mikdash shma bia. That was the halacha that Rish Lakish said. So the Gemara says now, maybe when Rish Lakish said this, he didn't say that it would be a chiv kares, it would only be a chiv lav. And therefore, there's no raya about anything about bia b'mikdash shma bia, because really the whole thing is only a lav anyway. The Zog to Gemara, Yosy Rav Amar Ravo le'inyan tamei shanaga. I'm sorry, Ravina Amar le'inyan malchus hitmar. Zog Rashi, Hadam lu'le'el mishvedish lakish is bebias miktas is le'inyan malchus ka'amar. K'dik ka'amar loike behedya. Those were the words that Ula used. If someone sticks his hand and he's loike, doesn't say it's chayiv kares. Avaloy le'inyan kares. So therefore, you can no longer ask me a kasha if I'm mitzayra. The Tosfos mitzayra shura keri. The Gemara asked the kasha if I'm a mitzayra shura keri. How could he stick his finger in? The teretz is we don't have a problem anymore because it's not a chayiv kares, it's allowed. The chiyiskish bia l'negia is las hara iskish. The whole hekish from bia to negia to tell us that even b'mitzvahs shma bia That's only lagabe alav. Kidichsev loy savai, elamikdash loy savai, aval einish loy iskish the ein einish benegia. There is no chorus. There's no chorus benegia, and therefore there wouldn't be chorus if someone enters. If someone enters b'miktas, although if someone enters completely, there would be a chiyuv. So Frek says, how does this answer any kasha? We're trying to because that it's not shver how they were allowed, how the mitzvah was allowed to stick his thumb in, because now it's not a chorus anymore, it's a lav. But it's a lav. And I say that's Tosis kasha. So Tosis was pierced b'kuntris. I'm only encouraged the Toisvei mitzayro shara carry. You can't be a kasha anymore because there's no chiyuv chorus to put his thumb in. The Hiksher Reb Chaim, the Akati Ika Lakshuye. This Reb Chaim is not our Reb Chaim. The Hiksher Reb Chaim, the Akati Ika Lakshuye. The Inasei Doichaloises Avasei. Lav the Negia b'miktzos. There's a lav of Negia b'miktzos, and there's a Nasei of Tameiyah l'Rabbis Tulul Yoim. So how could you have the Asei of the Mitzvah to put his finger in? How could you have that be Doicha Alois Avasei? So it's not Alois Sheish Bekaris, but Einasei Doicha Alois Avasei. Void Kashaloi, Afilu Lav Greda Hechidachilei. Even if it was only Alois and not to say, here you don't say Asei Doicha Alois. You know when you say Asei Doicha Alois, that's if while you are committing the Alois at that very moment, you are being Mekayim Mitzvah Asei. But here that's not what's happening. Habini de Me'akalav lo Mekayim Asei. He stuck his finger in, then later on they're doing the Zvikas Abahinas. But when he stuck his finger in right away, the loisasa was occurring without Asay occurring simultaneously. And for Toisvis, Yesh Leimer, the Asay Sheyesh Boikaris Kamer. The Asay of Korban Pesach is an Asay Sheyesh Boikaris. We're talking over here about the day of Erev Pesach. He wants to get his Korban down, and therefore there it will be Doicha, the loisasa, the loisasa greater. But if it was a loises that sheish by kares, then of course the asay of Pesach wouldn't be like a loises sheish by kares. Because Gemara writer, he also Ravin Amar Rabavo le'inyin tomei shenoga bekodesh itmar. Look Rashi lo yalef Rish Lakish malchus mehukra. Rish Lakish holds there's no malchus at all. Ela letomei shenoga bekodesh v'le'ari bevias mikdash klal. When it says b'chol kodesh loy siga, touching kodesh, that's malchus. Someone for shalach loy siga. But when it says v'al mikdash loy savoy, there the limud of bia b'mikdash shma bia does not include alav at all. There isn't even malchus. So now we have three levels. First, we said there's a chi of chorus from a bia b'mikdash. Ravini said there's only a chi of malchus, and Ravin says there isn't even a chi of malchus for the bia b'mikdash. The Itmar, Rishlakish Omar, like the Itmar, Tomei Shanaga Kodesh, a Tomei that touched Kodesh, Rishlakish Omar Loika, says of the Kodesh Loisiga. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Ein Loika. So you're going to ask, what do you mean Ein Loika? It says before, it's Bechol Kodesh Loisiga. How can you say you don't get Malchus? So the Gemara is going to explain. Rishlakish Omar Loika, it says Bechol Kodesh Loisiga. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Ein Loika. You know what Bechol Kodesh Loisiga is talking about? Ahu Betrumaksiv. Bechol Kodesh Loisiga is talking about truth. How do you know? How could you go take a lav and decide arbitrarily that it's not referring to Kodesh? It says B'chol Kodesh L'siga. So Rashi makes a very interesting cheshbon that clarifies it all. And Zot Rashi b'tru maksiv k'demuchach sefer dekra. You have to read the whole pasuk. It says in the pasuk B'chol Kodesh L'siga v'elamikdash L'savoy ad b'loy shemei tahira, until her days of tahira. So 33 days for a Zachar, 66 days for a Nekeva, Sheyariv Shimsha. Adonai Shemei Torah means until the end of the days of the Yemei Torah. But by Yoledis, you know what happens to be matter her bekachim after the days of Torah? Uvumloi Shemei Tahira, Leveina Levas, Tovi Kevis Ben Shnosh Eloila, Uveina Yisrael Lechatos. She has to bring a korban. So Memela she's in Chutz Kippurim. So even after the Meloi Shemei Tahira, she's still also on kachim. She tevils after the seventh day of her Leda for a Zachar, or 14 for a Nekeva, and then the whole Yemei Tahira Shalah, the rest of the days are called Yemei Tahira. During that period of time, she has the din of a Tfil Yoimor, and therefore she would be also Betruma, and she would be also Bekachim. He could feel a shame. Uvayoimar Bom Ve'echad Mevir Kabana. Then on the 41st day, she brings her carbon. I'm talking about a Zachar over here. And then in the morning, she becomes Mutter B'Kachim. So not of them Loishim Mei Tahira, is she Mutter and Kachim. The next day after that. So what happens with Loishim Mei Tahira? Umidichsev Loisiga Ad Loishim Mei Tahira, it's mashma, Abo Misha Yimlu Yamel, Tiga. The moment the evening comes, after the 40th day, she's allowed to touch whatever Kedusha she was forbidden from touching up until now. What is that talking about? She's a Mechuseres Kapara. So it must be the Torah saying of a Moshe Meitahira, she's allowed to touch Truma. But until then, she couldn't touch Truma. Because it's not talking about Kachim, because Kachim wouldn't be mutter to touch of a Moshe Meitahira. She would still have to wait till she brought a carbon. So therefore, he's a raya, Rabbi Yochanan is a raya, that the Pasuk of Bechol Kodesh Lisiga is not talking about Kachim, it's talking about Truma. So therefore, you don't have a lav for someone who touches Truma, who touches Kodesh. For Shlokish, so for Rabbi Yochanan, ain't like hahu b'Truma. Fragt Gemara, for Shlokish, the pasuk of Ubechol Kodesh Leisiga is telling you that there's a chiv lav if you touch kachim when you're tamei. We need it for something else. As hara la'oichel basar kodesh. How do we know that if someone eats basar kodesh, how do we know that he is over a lav when he's tamei? He could technically eat it without touching it. They can put it down his throat. The teretz it says B'chol Kodesh Leisiga, the Itmar. Ashara lo echol basar kodesh minayin. How does Rish Lakish know? How do we know that if you eat basar kodesh, you're going to be tamei? Zok to Gemara minayin Rish Lakish Amar. It says by your letters B'chol Kodesh lo Leisiga. Let's see how Rashi explains this. We have to wait for a little bit later because I'm going to bring it out. Zok to Gemara Rabbi Yochanan Amar Tani Bardla. So he's quoting from Bardla, Asya tumasoi mi bias mikdash. You know how you know that asara la'ochel basar kodesh? You know it from a gzer shava of tumasoi from bias mikdash. So let's have a look at what the Torah says. We have ois beis and ois gimel. So ois beis is va'nefesh asher toichel basar mi zevach hashalomim asher l'Hashem. So there's a chiv kares for someone who eats basar mizevach hashlamim, and then it says kol hanageh b'meis b'nefesh adam asher yamus v'lo yischata. If somebody is tamei tumas meis and he goes into the Beis Hamikdash, es mishkan Hashem timei v'nichrusa nefeshim Yisrael ki meinida lo yizarek alav tamei oy tumasay. So it says Tumasa here, and it says Tumasa here to tell you Mala Alam Onish Vehizer, Afkan Onish Vehizer. Now, by Nevesh Eshatoichal, Yipsar Zevach Hashlamim, there is no lav. So normally, Ein Oinchin Ela Imkein Masirin. You need a lav for that. But Kol Negebe Meis B'Nevesh Adam, there we do have a lav for it. So we say, just like Mala Alam Onish Vehizer. Yes, the Torah tells you that there's chorus, but there's also another pasuk that there's a law for it. Afghan, so too. When we're talking about oichel basar kodesh, even though there's no mefurish law for it, through the gzer shava, it borrows the law of going in to the Beis Hamikdash. Afghan onash v'hizir. Let's have a look at Rashi. Tumasoi, ksiv b'kares ba'oichel kodesh b'tumas haguf. The pasuk that discusses the chi of koresh for someone who eat kachim while he was tamei v'tumasoi alav. Uchsiv bevias mikdash. The pasuk also says when it's talking about someone who comes into the Beis Hamikdash when he's tamei, he uses the word oy tumasoi voy. Ma bias mikdash oy tumasoi voy. Ma bias mikdash ika asara. So it's the opposite. Madich by bias mikdash. There is a law for it elsewhere, and it says v'lo yitamu esmachaneim. So we say the chi of kares that the Torah mentions by bias mikdash, there's a lav associated with it of v'lo yitamus machaneim, even though we don't have a mefurish lav associated with touching kachim, but vibalt it says tumasoi av tumas haguf the oichel kodesh typically ashara meha. So therefore, Zok Rabbi Yochanan, I disagree with you, Reish Lakish, that we learn it from Bechol Kodesh Loisiga. I hold that we learn it from a completely different source, from Tumasai to Masai. Malalan Onish Vezer, Afkan Onish Vezer. But Rish Lakish holds that it's from Bechol Kodesh L'Siga. So getting back to our kasha, how could Rish Lakish tell me Bechol Kodesh L'Siga? He's talking about touching kachim, and that's what there's a law for. Rish Lakish just told us here that this law of Bechol Kodesh L'Siga is talking about Oichel Basar Kodesh. Zok to Gemara, Tamei Shenaga B'Kodesh. You know how Rish Lakish also learns the halacha of the Isser law for Tamei Shenaga B'Kodesh, Mida Avka Rachmana B'Lashon Nagia. We're talking, the way Rish Lakish learns, B'Chol Kodesh L'Siga is referring to Achila. So why didn't the Torah say Kol Kodesh L'Seichel? The Torah used the word L'Siga to describe the Isser of Achila. That also means to include a lav for their Shenagia. So Ashar La'oichel. So how do you see that B'Chol Kodesh L'Siga is answering Achilas Kachim? That was $1 million question. It says B'Chol Kodesh L'Siga. How do I know? How does Shlokish know that this is referring to Achila? Mida Iskish Kodesh LeMikdash. Since there's a hekesh from Kodesh to Mikdash, which Rashi says, Iker Kra Midrash. The main taich of the pasuk is for Achila, not for Nagia. Why? Mida Iskish Kodesh LeMikdash V'Haikra. In this pasuk, it says, Bechol Kodesh Loi Siga, Ve'al HaMikdash Loi Sova. So there's a hekesh between touching Kachim and between going into the Beis HaMikdash. Darshina Vidarshan, Ma Bias Mikdash, Davar Shayesh by Karas. The same way Bias Mikdash is talking about an Isser that comes with a Chi of Karas, because we know that if you go into the Beis HaMikdash, when you're Tameh, you're Chai of Karas. Af Asharas Kodesh, Davar Shayesh by Karas. There's nowhere in the Torah where it says if you touch Kachim, you're Chai of Karas. So therefore, Rish Lakish learns that when it says B'Chol Kodesh L'Siga, it has to be talking about an Aveira, that if you do this Aveira, Chai of Karas. That does not include the Gia. V'hainu Achila, therefore it's Achila. The Ilu B'Negia Loi Ashkechan Karas. You don't find in the Torah that if someone touches Kachim, he should be Chai of Karas. So clearly from the Hekesh, it's talking about Achila. So how do you see the B'Chol Kodesh L'Siga? How do you see a law for touching? Umiyu Ashar L'Negia, Nafkul Aminei, Medafka B'Lashon Negia. The Baal Torah expressed in the Isser of Achilas Kachim with Tomasai. Using the word Negia, it must be that Negia is also Bilav. Tanya Kavasei the Rish Lakish. We have a brisa that actually supports Rish Lakish. He has this hekesh from Kodesh L'Mikdash to teach us that B'Chol Kodesh L'Siga is primarily talking about an Isra Achila, which when someone is Tameh, where there's a Chi of course associated with. And the brisa says exactly that. B'Chol Kodesh L'Siga, Ashara La'oichel, that's an Isser for someone who eats Kachim when he is Tameh. Ata Omer Ashara La'oichel, Maybe L'Siga means L'Siga. Talmud Loimar B'Chol Kodesh L'Siga, immediately followed by the El HaMikdash Loisal. Makish Kodesh L'Mikdash. We're comparing the prohibition of Kodesh L'Siga in this pasuk to the prohibition of the Mikdash Loisavai in this pasuk. Ma Mikdash Davar Sheyesh Boy Netilas L'Shama. Just like the Isser of entering the Beis HaMikdash when one is Tameh, it comes with a Chi of Karis. Av Kodesh Davar Sheyesh Boy Netilas L'Shama. So too, the B'Chol Kodesh L'Siga must be referencing a violation that leads to a Chi of Karis. V'ibn Ageya. And if you're going to say that the B'Chol Kodesh L'Siga means Negia, Netilas L'Shama Mi'ika. There is no Netilas L'Shama. There's no Chi of Karis. Ella Be'achila. It must be that the Torah is only talking about an Isser Achila. Gewaltig. V'akati mi'boyele. We still have a problem with Rish Lakish's limud of the B'Chol Kodesh L'Siga should be referring to touching Kachim, because we needed to teach us yet an additional thing. So besides the fact that B'Chol Kodesh L'Siga is referring to eating Kachim, the Lashon L'Siga, which until now we wanted to say, Rish Lakish uses to tell you that it's also to touch Kachim, we need it for something else. We need it L'Tamei She'achal Basar Kodesh L'fnei Zrika. The main Isser to eat Kachim when you're Tamei is after the Zrika Saddam, when it's already royu to be eaten by the person who's supposed to eat it, whether it's the Kohen, whether it's the Yisrael. What if someone ate The Tomasoi, he ate basar kachim, but it was not yet mutter to be eaten even to a tahar. There, how do we know there's a lav? We know to move a chodesh leisiga. The itmar tomei she'achal basar kodesh lifnei zrika. Rish Lakish Amar Loika. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Einay Loika. Rish Lakish Amar Loika because it says Bechol Kodesh Loisiga. Bechol Kodesh Loishna Lifnei Zrika. V'Loishna Lachas Zrika. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Einay Loika. Rabbi Yochanan, you don't get malchus for that. Kidetani Bardla. He goes back to his hekesh of Bardla. Asher Tumasoi. V'chikasav Hahu. And the pasuk of Tumasoi is La'achar Zrika. It's after Zrika. Let's have a look. Let's have a look of the Tomasoi again. It says, that's speaking Zokt Bardala after the Zrik Saddam. How do you know? Because it says in the next pasuk called Negeh b'meish v'nefesh adam shelo yamus lo yischatas mus kshamtimei v'nichus nefeshim Yisrael ki meinida lo yizarek alav tam yiyah ay Tomasoi boy. So let me have a look at Rashi. As Tomasoi, Asaris Tomei Shelo Yochel Kodesh, Alma as Harasa Me Oinshe Yalfa. We learned the Hasar from the Oinish. Well, Oinshe La'achar Zrikahu Lefnei Zrika. V'lo Lefnei Zrika. We only know that there's an Oinish of Koresh for somebody who eats basar kachim. When he's Tomei, we only know about the Oinish Koresh if there was a Zrika done already. How do you know that? Kidekatani, the Gemara, that Kaimet you might think that if you ate basar kodesh when you're a tamei, yet the basar kodesh did not yet have the zrikas damim, you would think you would still get kares for that. Talmud Leimer kol tar yochel basar, immediately followed by the words va'nevesh asher toichel basar, and we learn from there haniter l'tahirim chayavin alav mishum tumah. You know where there's va'nefesh teichel basar chayiv karis? That's only basar where it says on it kol Torah yechel basar. So the basar that the Torah says kol Torah yechel basar, basar that the Torah says that Torah made, that basar, if a tamei eats it, he will be chayiv karis. But she'ein niter l'Torah, if you have basar that you can't apply the pasuk of kol Torah yechel basar to, because we're talking about basar before the zrikas dam, ein chayavin alav mishum tumah. Therefore, Rabbi Yochanan concludes that there is no lav, even from Tomasoi, there's no lav on basar kachim that one ate if the basar kachim was holding before the zrika. But Rish Lakish holds from ubechol kodesh leisiga, it also includes even basar kachim before the zrika. So how could you say you also know from there an iser to touch kachim? Zok Gemara ki kasabahu. La'achar zrika, im kain zok Rish Lakish lemer kraba kodesh. It should have said b'kodesh loisiga. Why b'chol kodesh loisiga? My b'chol kodesh shma min atarti. We know sai truma if you touch it your tummy, sai kachim if you touch it your tummy, and sai if you eat kachim, b'tumas aguf even before the zrika, there'll also be a chiyuv lav. Okay, kavalta. So there's a jam-packed pasuk of B'chol Kodesh Leisiga V'al Mikdash Tzavay is a jam-packed pasuk. According to Rish Lakish, we learn many things out of it. Okay, Gavalta. Go ahead.